Please stand for the pledge. J. Claire Hayes, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, roll call, please, Kathy.
Powell.
Here.
Hayes.
Here.
Barstow.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Hicken. Walter.
Here.
Carter.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum present. The purpose of this special meeting tonight is to discuss some more of the 2018 budget. Any citizens' comments? Seeing none. You want to start us off there, BJ?
I would love to. Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate everybody getting together again tonight to talk about the budget. The beauty of our schedule that we've implemented the last couple of years is that it allows plenty of time for us to do these sorts of things and have good discussion on the budget as we move forward. Tonight we want to talk about some of the proposed changes, amendments that were presented to council and that we recommend that we proceed with. Some of those, we'll talk about what it does to the different funds that we have, how it helps stabilize some of the funds, some of those changes on future years. We'll also talk about the finance position and go over some information about that Jamie had presented to it. So with that, I would certainly like to turn it over to Alan. He's got the lion's share of the proposed changes that we have in the budget, and let him talk about what is being proposed as far as those changes.
Okay, just 1 second, Alan. Yep. Let the record show that Mr. Hicken has arrived.
Greetings all.
And has brought, did you bring food? No, you did not bring food? Okay. Mr. Hicken has arrived at 6:02 and now is joining the party.
Don't come late unless you bring food.
That's right.
Party without.
Alan, it's all yours, sir.
We did bring food.
Oh, okay.
All right, we tried to sharpen our pencils a little bit due to the concerns on the budget. One of the things I want to point out here as I begin is that as you go down through the line item changes I think that you all have for the 2018 budget, it doesn't have a whole lot of effect on the 2018 budget. Reason for that is when you look at, as I believe Mr. Walter pointed out last time, the expense versus the revenue for 2018. The big part of that is the Mink Road Phase 2 project and the Taylor Road project. We've been planning for those for a few years, so the numbers have been going up for the past few years, and then it shows a sharp drop-off in 2018. And for Mink, our in-house portion is about $1.1 million, and for Taylor, it's about $150,000. So that accounts for a good amount, if not all, of the expenditures exceeding the revenues in the Public Service Department. Including last year, we discovered we had about $600,000 that was missed. We were really frugal in 2017 because of that, if you compare the numbers. And of course, the costs on both those projects have increased as time has gone by. Thank you. All that being said, I think we do show a healthier fund balance with the changes we've made, and I'll run through those, a couple highlights to those changes.
Alan, can you hold on just a second? I don't have a copy of whatever it is you're looking at. The line item changes.
Okay.
We can make copies and.
You want to make copies?
Yeah, I'll make copies.
I don't know why.
I think it was sent out in an email.
Yeah, I've seen it, but I don't have a copy with me
thought they
here,
were.
so.
I apologize. I don't have them with me.
Okay. Let's see. The first one is there was a comment. There was some confusion about a couple projects with using the fee in lieu of. We removed that from the Taylor Road project, and we added it into and left it in the Oak Meadow Drive project. So we have accounted for those dollars appropriately. Next thing is the retention detention pond inventory analysis. We received the report, and what that showed us is we don't need quite as much money as we thought we did, so we reduced that to $10,000 for next year. Other thing on Oak Meadow is we had clarified the clerical errors that we had and increased the funding on that one a little bit to make sure we cover everything that needs to be funded on that. The dump trucks. So we had, we moved the tandem axle that was a few years out, we removed that. I don't think we'll need the tandem for a few years anyhow. So we dropped that one off. That, again, helps our projected fund balance. The single axle that was proposed for 2019, we moved that out to 2020. But we did leave the single axle as proposed for 2018 in. I know Mr. Walter had requested some pictures. Those didn't get to me in time. We were trying to get some service records. What I'd looked at didn't look great. We had some higher service costs on that 96. It does have, I have some numbers, which is has over 5,000 hours on it. It's got a broken plow mount. There is some salt deterioration, some rusting out of the cab, and it does have electrical issues. I guess there's a fuse that blows in it just about every time we go to use it. Another justification for that is we're getting some new equipment. We've been outfitting the trucks with electronic salt controls, which is much more efficient than just flipping the switch on and off. The old truck doesn't have that. I don't think we would want to put new equipment like that on a truck that old. Same with pre-wetting. We did move the pre-wetting that we'd proposed for 2018 out to 2019, and that's where you wet the salt before it hits the road to activate the salt. That equipment, I don't think we'd want to put that on an old truck if we move forward with that. Reliability has been an issue. I guess there was a time we had 2 trucks down during plowing season, and I don't think that's good. We got 8 guys, and well, we have 9 trucks, but one of them's going to be used for brine, and one of them's only a 1-ton. So with 2 trucks down, we were not able to get everybody out there that we could to plow, and that's obviously something we want to avoid. I guess there's the intangibles, which are the personnel, needing the equipment to do the job. I don't. Maybe this is me focusing more on people than a bottom line, but it does factor into morale and retainage of people, personnel. Left the pickup truck in. The floorboards are actually rusting out, is my understanding. Every time I went to look at the truck, it was actually out being used, but there is a hole in the floorboard. It's pretty much the end of the useful life for what we need it for. And the truck we're proposing to replace it with will be a 4-door pickup truck. It's much more efficient for Jason to move guys from place to place instead of the one that he has now. Next item is the Mink Street garage. I could have been getting service numbers or project numbers to these. Sorry if you want those. That's for the Mink garage is 17038. For the office, went down with Jason and took a look at what we could do there to get him a separate office. We think we can probably do, 15,000 was the number for that. We think we can do it for a little bit less than that, but didn't want to have to come back and ask for more. And the scenario there is it's not impossible for him to do work where he is. He does it where he is, but it's for a manager. I think it's better with vendors, contractors, residents coming in that he has a separate office. It's not the same as the break room, just for being able to talk to people, talk on the phone, do business, discipline, and that's, of course, not to mention that you hear everything that happens in the restroom while you're sitting at Jason's desk. So not exactly pleasant. The doors at the Mink garage, it's protect equipment. We left that one in there. I think that's a good thing, just to keep the equipment out of the elements. We did remove the track hoe, somewhat reluctantly on my part, but I'll do some, try and get some numbers together potentially for next year, and we'll maybe look at that again. And that is everything that I wanted to comment on specifically. Happy to answer any questions.
Are we eliminating something that would give us another plow truck on the road? Or did you say that you have enough personnel and enough trucks with plows to keep everybody out?
We left the single, we'd originally had in 2018 to put a single axle, to get a new single axle dump truck, and that was left in. And that would.
That
help
has a
with that.
plow on it.
Yes,
That
it would be
comes with a
fully
plow.
outfitted for plowing.
Anything else for Alan?
Yes, sir.
Alan, on the Oak Meadow Drive, I'm not sure I understand exactly the second sentence in this says, of the $100,000 increase, 65 was from payment in lieu fund and 65 was from street fund. I'm not sure what you're trying to say, what's being said there.
If I can, if we're looking at the payment in lieu fund, that's if we install sidewalks on Oak Meadow, we would use payment in lieu fund to do that from our sidewalk payment in lieu. The other 65 is straight from the street fund, which would be for paving, drainage, that sort of stuff that street fund's used for.
Oh, it should have said 35,000.
That's what I was trying to,
Oh,
I couldn't
Yeah,
figure out
it
where
should
you were
say-
going
That
with
should be
it
35,000, because that'd be 130.
Yeah.
Right.
Not 100. Yes, it is 35,000.
from the street fund.
Street.
Yes.
Correct.
55 and 35 makes 100, okay,
Right,
gotcha.
exactly.
Okay,
And then,
sure, go ahead.
I'm trying to find it in here, but I thought somewhere in one of your write-ups, you talked about the two-door truck being transitioned to somebody else to use, and then the four-door truck would be used for a crew truck. Is that true still? I mean, I don't know where I saw it. I saw it somewhere.
Yes, so the 94, I think it is, would be removed from service. Jason's truck is a two-door, that would go down to replace that truck's usage. And then we would get the four-door to replace Jason's truck so that he could move crew members around as needed.
And how old is Jason's truck?
Not terribly, I don't know the answer to that exactly, but it can't be more than about 5 years old.
Yeah, it's about 5 years old, and it would be made then the fleet truck that would replace the orange, as we're calling it, the orange 1988, 89 truck. It would become the fleet truck, and then the new one would become Jason's truck to be able to transport guys around to trainings, job sites, that sort of stuff.
And so Jason's job is not to transport everybody around, right? He's the superintendent. He's driving around from site to site to site. He's going to see things. I'm just trying to understand, he's gonna use a four-door crew truck as his truck, but I still don't think he's he's not a taxi driver.
No,
So-
that's not the only reason. We'd actually look to get a smaller truck, it's like a four-door, maybe like a Colorado or something like that, that has actual doors for the back seats. No, it's not his job just to cart people around, but it makes it, when he does need to, which he does, it makes it more efficient.
And 5 years ago, when you bought the two-door, I mean, I'm just trying to understand how things changed here, that we now need a four-door truck to transfer everybody around, when we didn't need it a few years ago.
I wasn't there, of course. My understanding was Jason didn't feel like he needed that truck specifically, but some people decided he needed a bigger truck.
That's correct.
I don't.
That's correct.
Okay. Anything else, Andy? I mean, we can come back to
Yeah, go ahead. I've got a couple other ones.
Okay. Anything else for street committee? Yes, sir.
Al, I'm sorry. That was from me.
I'm sorry, it wasn't street committee, for Mr. Haynes.
Alan, as I look, and this is a holistic question from the budget. As I looked through it, I had heard some narration, and I had talked to you talk about the safe crossings at Taylor Broad, Taylor 310 and Township. However, it looks to me like those don't happen for a while. And it looks like the money kind of trickles in, if that's the right term. There's an engineering, well, it's almost like we said, we looked at what we had. We said, oh, we can do some engineering in 18 and maybe some in 19 and maybe in 20 we can talk about this safe crossings. And one of my concerns is that's fairly, I think that is important, and I didn't see it specifically as saying, oh, it'll absolutely be done by 20. Can you give me a feel for where you are on that?
We didn't add that specifically. The changes we made to that project, we expanded the name a little bit to say Broad Street, pedestrian safety access. And we show the numbers didn't change for what we show in there, which was 50,000 for engineering in 18, 25,000 for right-of-way acquisition in 19, and then in the write-up we identified that we anticipate, I believe it was $300,000 of project cost roughly in around 2020, but that we would be looking for grant opportunities for that money. That's the way we had currently left it.
And can you refresh my memory as to what you thought a ballpark estimate was? We had started thinking it was going to be about 20, and I want to say 74 was the final kind of, once we talked. Who did the consulting on that?
Jobs Henderson looked at that as part of the retainer.
And as part of the retainer, did they not come back with something in
They looked at, a couple intersections, and I think that's what you're getting to, what the price was per intersection, more or less, to put in all the pedestrian facilities needed. I don't recollect specifically, but I want to say it was somewhere around like 65,000.
And that's to do one intersection.
One full
For lack of a better
intersection, if
term.
you looked at doing all the crossings with all the curb ramps and ped heads, striping, and sidewalks around it that would need to connect.
I've forgotten what a pet head is.
Pedestrian head that shows walked on.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, I guess I'm still looking, for me, that tells me we're not looking at that seriously until 2021.
Well, what I would recommend is getting some direction from council as far as reducing the ramp potentially to 350 for next year, or whatever the cost is to do this, or biting into the carryover that we're going to be having moving forward. You know, if you look at an amount that much to cut what's left after Lee's cut, there's really nothing left to cut to be able to afford that. So you're looking at either getting more into our carryover, which, you know, in our street fund, we've been able to stabilize to right around $1 million per year, starting in 2018 and out through 2022, where it starts to go back up, or reducing the ramp by that amount to be able to, I mean, that's a matter of priorities for council to.
Well, I know, and in my other discussion, I was probably looking more at I guess I was looking at twofold. Number one, probably the carryover versus the ramp. Like, if we're gonna have X number of dollars left over at the end of this year, and we're not budgeting for that specifically next year, is there a piece that can be taken out of that? And then the secondary question to that, for me, is can we do, this is gonna sound crazy, but can we do one? Can we start and move forward to ultimately move towards a time when people could cross those intersections? And of course, it's up to council to make the final determination as to whether that's a high enough on their list. But once again, having been out there, all those crossings, people are walking across, people are turning, and they're moving fast. And for me, it's just something I think is warranted.
So to answer the second question then, I say yes, we could absolutely take a phased approach and identify what areas we want to do first and continually build on that. To answer the first question, I know there's been talk about using the savings from this year for next year. I think we had discussed previously waiting until we saw what those actual savings were and decide what to do with that. And then I know there's at least 3 different things that have been proposed to use that for. One's drainage projects, one is pedestrian facilities, and I think one was adding it to the ramp, the streets. So I guess we would need some direction from council on what to prioritize out of those, which I'm guessing you're going to ask for more information on what each of those would cost and such, but we can get to
Well, and
that.
at that point, though, I also think that becomes a 2018 budget, because to use that money this year as that would still be coming over that carryover that would be in 2018. It would just be represented as carryover money, because that's where it is in the budget right now.
So it would return to our bottom line, and then we could appropriate it
Right.
as needed by council.
Our 2 options to do this, from what I see, is getting into the carryover amount or reducing some other project to be able to fund a portion of some other. If we want to do 1, 2, whatever, but cutting into another project that's budgeted. I use the ramp as an example. We could certainly do that, or looking at using some of the carryover.
Let me think on that.
Want to think about that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Barstow?
Yeah, refresh my memory. How many intersections, and what are the intersections again that we're talking about?
There's 3, right? 3 major?
Three. One is the intersection of Broad and Taylor. One is the intersection of State Route 310 and Broad, and one is Township and Broad.
Well, Broad and Taylor, I thought you said that. It might be a little problematic because part of that intersection is in the city of Reynoldsburg.
If it is the COTC side, and this kind of gets to another thing, where for the most part, each of these intersections, as I see it, is one crossing. So it's the crossing that I have seen anyway, from the COTC across to what essentially would be Cones and Concoctions. The other one would be Catalonia across the street to the bridge and continuing up past Wendy's. And the third one would be to use landmarks from the Nutcracker to Buster's. Those are now, we've talked about ultimately the city's design, and this is also what put this on a little bit of a delay, was we've got some people, some high estate people looking at kind of some sidewalk plans that they're doing as part of a class project, and that kind of pushed it a little bit, and so I backed off to see what they would say. But there's also a feeling as to ultimately which side of the road do you want people to walk on. So right now, the dangerous part that nobody pays, I mean, they're going to cross no matter what. And if we just stripe the road, which was my original idea, that puts us possibly in a liability situation. But the citizens that are walking there don't seem to be dedicating themselves, for instance, to walking on the north side. They're going from McDonald's to Buster's to wherever that happens to be, or they're walking down from Amherst Village to go to the Nutcracker, or they're parking at COTC to walk across Broad Street to Cones and Concoctions or something like that. And those so all of those are on specific sides of the road, but the question then begs, do we want to have a proper east, west, north, south crossing put in, as opposed to just, this is where we think people are going to get hit, because that's where they're walking.
Okay. I thought you were talking about a full-blown, all four corners or three, however many there were at the specific, doing the whole thing with.
Well, and I wasn't.
That's what I thought. That's why I wanted to just clarify.
I wasn't, but I think the feeling from Alan, at least, is the ultimate plan may be that the way you should traverse is either on the north or the south side, and we should.
Well, and to, I guess, expand on that a little bit, like the north side between Kroger and the east intersection of 310 and Broad Street, that's where we could feasibly put a sidewalk. On the south side, there's just a lot more challenges with the way the ditches are and such. So that was specifically, so my thought, at that intersection with Broad at 310 and Township, was we'd probably want to put one across going north and south just to get there, and then, on the south to go east and west as well. And we could look at that per intersection. The west intersection of Broad and Main, we could probably do one across Main and one across Broad, and that gets everybody where they need to be, more or less. So,
I guess the other question I would ask is, there's always it's not a confusion, there's always the issue of, is it budgeted and do you need it? And for me, the first step when we look at something is, if next year all of a sudden, I don't know, we use no salt again, and there happens to be another $78,000 that, hey, this looks good come spring, we know we're not going to salt over the summer. If it's not budgeted, what kind of authority do we lose in that respect? And that's for you, Mr. King.
If it's not budgeted, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's not necessarily budgeted, it can always be budgeted through a supplemental appropriation to take it from the salt budget to say we're going to put it in the street fund or capital fund in order to use it for crossings.
So is it easier to budget it and put the projects in, so that if you have the money, you say, this is an option? Do you guys want to, do you want to spend $65,000 on this new drainage problem we've discovered, or do you want to spend $65,000 making a safe crossing at this location? Or is it better to wait for certain things and do a supplemental?
Well, I guess it's council's desire. If we budget it, it's certainly going to be represented in this bottom line that we have on this here. If we look at saying, hey, let's wait to see if we have some savings, and we take that saving that's already budgeted, it's not moving or costing more with this bottom line. So, I mean, it's 6 one way, half dozen the other. If we budget it and we use all the salt and we also do the crosswalks, it's costing the city more money to do it that way, versus if we don't use all the salt, we have $75,000 left over, and we reappropriate that for the project. Does that make sense?
Basically, we just make sure
Yes.
if we get a savings that we all agree that's what we're going to earmark it for.
Or we can certainly budget for it. I mean, it can certainly be called out as a CIP project and put in the budget, and adopt it as part of the budget, which has the money there dedicated to do it, versus waiting to see if we have a savings and reappropriating it.
Well, I'm only one on council, so.
There is a third option, and that is, again, in January or early February, if carryover balance is significantly higher than planned or expected, then you could use some of that, and bring the line back down to where it is projected now, if carryover balance is higher.
Another thing to consider with that is we do show the engineering at 50,000 for next year. We got to do the engineering first. So by the time that came around and we had all that, then we might have a better idea of what next year's budget is and how much.
That's
we
all
can throw
three?
at it.
All three get engineered for 50,000?
I think we could get a pretty good ways with that, if not more. Yes.
If we did one, it'd be less.
Mrs. Carter.
I think I would like to see a commitment to try to do one a year at least, instead of planning out, 3 years from now, getting them all started at one time, only because I share Tim's concern. These are intersections that are, I cannot believe we have not had pedestrian hits in these locations already. Obviously, I would think some of the ones here in downtown, along Broad and 310 probably are more, would need more attention than per se the one at Broad and Taylor, because that one tends to be more seasonal. You worry about that one in the summer, spring. So, but it would be my opinion that we should at least try to get one in a year, and then still look at carryover or whatever we might have to move those forward.
But the 50,000 for engineering is in the budget?
Yes.
Okay.
Could be construction funds we'd be.
Hang on, Mr. Barstow. Anybody have any other comments before we go roundy round again?
Yeah.
Mr. Powell?
Yeah, I like that idea. I think we should at least try to budget for one, and then if the opportunity does present itself with savings from salt or whatever, try and add some more, and then maybe just get them all taken care of, and we can take those out of our future budgets.
Mrs. Hayes?
Tim, did you say that Broad and Main, east to west? Or did you say north to south?
It would be east to
Going
west.
from like the Wendy's, like the Carlock corner to the,
Catalana to the creek.
yeah, okay, is that what you said? That's
Yes, ma'am.
great. Okay, I just want to make sure that was in there.
Just a clarification
you
on
got
that
anything?
discussion.
I don't on this.
Just a clarification.
Mr. Walther, go ahead.
We think each one of them are going to be 50,000, is that right, Alan, roughly?
65 was the number roughly. Now the one at 310 and Broad, the three-legged intersection there, that one will probably have some extra cost to it just because there's nowhere on the southeast corner to put anything.
Mr. Barstow?
So what exactly are we doing? Is this going to be just striping, or is this going to be
Like,
walk, don't walk signs?
Heads.
Well,
Pedestrian
when you said pet heads, I had a rather horrible vision.
Pedestrian signal. Pedestrian
I mean,
signal would probably be the right
head.
way to say it.
Ped heads.
Ped.
I thought you were
Cross-
saying pet
So did I. I
heads.
was like, I don't know.
I thought, whoa. That's why I asked.
It'll
Don't
be
keep
a
me from crossing the
pedestrian
street.
crossing signal up on the poles. Those will be wired up, so when you hit the button, you see them, it'll flash, or when it's time for you to go, it'll say, walk now.
Okay,
that goes with
great.
the timing of the light.
Correct.
and
Yeah,
everything.
I use those every day, and I can tell you,
They
from
don't
crossing
have pet
streets and
heads on
down.
'em?
No, but for crossing, this is in Columbus where I walk to the courthouse. You do take your life in your own hands. Okay, it is definitely that has no effect on crazed drivers who aren't paying attention. But anyway, I think it's a good idea. But I think before we talk about Broad and Taylor, we need to check and see whose light that is.
Agreed.
We maintain that.
Is
light.
it we do it because it could be if it's over on the other side, it could be a Reynoldsburg light or an Oak.
That intersection is, all that right of way is in the city.
It is.
Okay,
It is.
I know because the
Portion is out of.
okay. It's right there on the border. I just want to make sure.
It's right on the border, and Kathy's right, all the right-of-way is there, and
Okay.
where we're looking on the north side, the east-west crossing, that's all in the city.
Right, the north side for sure. It's just on the south side, and I just want to make sure that because there's like the Circle K and the Family Dollar or whatever that is, dollar store are actually in Reynoldsburg, I believe.
Yeah, that
They
little
are.
piece is.
That piece. I just want to make sure that we don't
Yeah.
we don't have
Improve Reynoldsburg.
a war with Reynoldsburg over taking over their lights. Okay.
We already had that one when Mr. Cake went in and who was going to determine that
All
right
right,
away.
yeah. So okay. I just want to make sure. Okay. All right.
Any other deadhead conversation?
No, but I have a question about something else for Alan. And I may,
Hang on just a second.
Yeah.
Yes, we need some clarification in terms of amount.
Well, no, I think what we need is some clarification if council would like to see this as part of the budget in the amended budget preparation that's going to be presented on the 6th, and we'll determine the amount for one, what it would cost, and have that in the budget.
Anything, Jamie, you want to add anything? Okay.
Does that need to come in the form of a motion, BJ? Or just,
I think a general consensus.
Yes,
that-
consensus is good.
I guess what I would say, and everybody else can comment on this, would be to keep the $50,000 in, perform the engineering on each of the crossings, and possibly take your best stab at what one crossing would take, and include that. Would be my, since the 50,000's already in there, and the engineering has to happen before anything else.
But can I just ask a quick question? The 50,000 is actually for our ramp engineering, correct? This is separate from the ramp engineering for 2019?
This is specific to the crosswalks.
This is SVC 14064, so it's been there for a few years. We just adapted a little bit. So yeah, 50,000 in 18.
18.
Got it. Okay.
Well, general consensus?
Can I just ask a couple more quick questions, just in general of what we have included in our street fund?
Sure can.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, Alan, what we have included in this, and Jamie and whomever, the single axle dump truck with a plow for $170,000, which is a lease payment. The four-door service truck at $30,000, lease payment again. Is the skid steer broom still in, or is it out?
Yes.
In?
In.
For $10,000. We've upped the Oak Meadow Drive reconstruction project from $550,000 to $700,000, correct?
I think it was from 600,000 to 700,000.
Okay, I'm just going by the October 11th, which is fine, so 700,000. The annual street maintenance program to be 650,000, is that right?
Correct.
Which is consistent, yeah.
Which is what we had before. And then we go on down here to the 2019 street program engineering at 50,000. The Mink Street garage improvements at 35,000. Graham Calmore improvement design at 45,000. Is that still in? Retention detention is 15,000.
I think we reduced that to 10. Yeah.
15 and 18,
10,000.
10 after that.
10 thereafter, yeah.
Right. And then the Broad Street striping at 25,000.
Yes.
Is that the entire list at this point? I'm just making sure I have the.
Of street fund programs, capital programs?
Correct.
Sign inventory software is the only other thing that would show up out of the street fund. We initially had that as for this year. We didn't advance far enough in our GIS this year to need that. So we put in for that again for 5,000 for next year for inventory software if we need it.
But that was a carryover from this year. You didn't spend it this year, so it's going in next year?
Yes.
Okay. That's I just want to make sure I had the whole list.
Well, just clarify, are you looking for capital projects in the street fund, or, yes?
Capital projects.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. So the only other one I've got a question about is the auction, the house is obviously going to be purchased in 17, not 18, so that's not
Correct.
anything we're going to worry about.
No.
And the other drainage projects that we've talked about, we haven't talked about adding any of those for next year, and that was something that that at least I understood we were going to look at any surplus to run some of these drainage projects, which we discussed last meeting in the street department was the Bristol drainage could be upwards of 100,000, although we don't think it is, but an estimate for that. We've got the Cable Road at 40-ish.
Right. What we decided with Cable Road was we could do that in-house for materials.
Bring it way down.
Yeah, and
Right.
we've got covered in our operation. Confident
Okay.
we can cover that in operations.
And we've still got the Calmore drainage that we got to deal with somehow, some way in the future.
Right, and we put the construction of that out another year to 2019. So that does show up in the 5-year as funded in 2019. Bristol Drive, I haven't done anything with that yet. Obviously, that came up kind of late. We haven't even done survey to see if anything.
Okay.
So what we
I just want
want.
to make sure I had the right list together. Thanks.
Mrs. Hayes?
question, I just don't know, so this is kind of a throw it out there question. Are any of the drainage repairs part of the question that Mr. Hughes had about International Drive? Is that something in our future?
So, okay, so there's two things to Mr. Hughes. One is the flooding he receives because the stormwater basin behind him isn't working.
Right.
And that one, as we get the ordinance that we're presenting hopefully here sooner than later for stormwater maintenance goes through, then we'll be able to go to the owner and address that.
Okay.
The second part of that is International Drive drainage in general, and I don't think I have that spreadsheet with me. It is factored in, but
Okay.
it's a few years out.
Okay. A few years out. Okay. And I have another question.
Yes.
It's the same kind of question, just that that's an I don't know question. Anywhere in the budget that we have slip covers or whatever you call them for the Main Street electrical street fair boxes? I know that was something that was discussed before I came on council. That was something that Dan was adamant that I asked about 2 years ago when I came on. So slip covers, I don't know what you call them. Is that what you call them, slip covers?
Just
Something-
covers for the boxes and
Yeah,
those.
because
yeah.
that was originally, I think that it was discussed that they would not remain metal
Right.
in appearance.
Have a cover on them.
Absolutely.
We were supposed to have a cover.
And those would be paid out of the TIF fund just as an operations.
Okay, and so is that something that can be done this year out of that, or do we have to wait until the entire Main Street project is complete?
I think we could do it sooner than later. We've looked at
Okay.
a couple options. I guess we haven't settled on what would be the best. We had
Okay,
some
so we can
difficult
look at
finding
it this
something
year.
that
So
would
that's a
fit
TIF.
over them and still.
I would pay for that out of the TIF as we've
Okay.
paid for everything non-utility related for the Main
Okay.
Street project.
So that's not technically street, that would be
No.
utility.
And the
Okay.
TIF funds are dedicated only to State Route 310 improvements on them.
Okay, and so would it also be TIF funds when we, this year, get to a point where we can remove poles and electric? Is that
That's
also-
already in the budget.
It's in the
for it.
budget.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mr.
I
Barstow.
just have something, I don't know, the chief may have data on this, he may not, on these three intersections we talked about, back to our previous discussion. If you do have some data on maybe, I don't think we've had any, I don't know, we've had pedestrian incidents, I'm not saying, oh yeah, you have that off the top of your head, but maybe just to help us figure out which one might be prioritized as part of a, if there's one that's worse than the other, maybe on crashes or pedestrian.
I remember having actually a fatal at Broad and 310. There was a individual in a wheelchair that was crossing and got hit. And I think he had some other complications.
Okay.
So, but it was definitely
Okay, just some that might help.
Sure.
That might help.
Dig into it.
Look at that. Okay, thanks.
Anything else? Yes, sir, Mr. Lee?
Alan, I'm going to kind of go where Suzanne did with Main Street. She brought up the power poles. Another thing that I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that was going to get done was, and it's very minor, the crosswalk that's galvanized was going to be painted to match the poles at some point. Is that still in the works?
Yeah, and that's just an operations thing. As far as
I
state
didn't hear
highway.
you. What was it?
Yeah.
I just remember,
Painting
I
the
only brought it up
crosswalk
because you
pole.
brought those covers up. The galvanized crosswalk was going to be
Yeah.
painted to match. That was just
The
another thing.
flashing
Yeah.
near the PD, and that would be out of operations, probably state highway.
That's the first I'd heard of that. I didn't realize we were supposed to be.
That was
painting
probably
so. Okay.
before. With that being said, the unfinished projects with the poles, or with the electric being buried, and with the new purchase of the house at Mink, and it may be right in front of me, and you guys may have discussed it at the last meeting. Where is that money? That was probably the, 16 budget that weren't complete, and that we'll be paying for it now. Where would I find that? I just wanted to see where that was, because I couldn't,
So
it all runs together after a while.
there's three things there. There's one, there's the house at Macon Broad.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, I would like Jamie to talk about carrying over POs that are open.
Right.
Typically, what happens when you have a multi-year project, and these are wonderful when they go 3 and 5 years, trying to keep
Right.
track of what it is. When council approves a set amount of money for a project, we issue a purchase order, which basically encumbers or restricts those funds. We're allowed to carry those over into future years. So when you look at the budget, if you look at my reports, you'll see the permanent budget, supplementals that add to it, and carryover encumbrances. So all of that adds to the budget. So prior year purchase orders are carried over, and we pay off of those. When those, let's say if we carry over $100,000 and it's only $85,000, the departments aren't able to use that money for some other purpose, we close the PO, the money goes back into the carryover balance. Current year purchase orders, that money goes back into their budget, and they can reuse that how they need to. But when it's been dedicated for a single thing, once it's paid off or spent out and it's all done, whatever's left goes back into the carryover balance. But that's how we are able to pay for bills on projects years later.
I was just curious when it gets that far out.
Well, and a
how
good
it works.
example, or like the Mink Street project or the Taylor Road project, we have POs that were open 14, and those just continue to roll. We encumber the amount we need when it's opened, and as long as we don't close those, that money remains available for future use.
How much
for those projects?
Off the top, you may not know this. How much were those two projects?
Which we have
Mink?
4 phases of Mink, so
How much is it going to cost to, now that the house is purchased, to complete the project?
I don't know off the top of my head.
The intersection.
I have to look at where we got.
Okay, so I think you're talking about a couple different things. One, I think what you're talking about is in my report to council, it shows that the projected budget on both Main Street and Mink Street are a little bit light. And I think I projected those somewhere around 30,000 each, the additional that was needed.
Thought I saw it somewhere, I
Didn't
just
put that
couldn't remember.
specifically in the budget because we don't know what those costs are actually going to be. And I'd anticipated that the 30,000 would be the limit on that, and that we'd be able to fund that out of other savings within the budget.
Okay.
And I didn't line item those specifically. And then the house, I think that's being covered under something else, so that didn't factor in.
Right. There's money in the grant to purchase, for purchase house.
That's all I got.
Anything else on streets? Around. Yes.
International Drive drainage.
Yeah.
So there's the problem with the storm sewers not functioning properly. What is the other problem that you're looking at specifically? Where at International Drive?
Well, I think a large portion of the problem comes from the stormwater basin behind International Drive not working. I think if that worked, there'd be a lot less of a drainage issue on International Drive. So my proposed approach would be to take care of, get that ordinance in place, get the owner to take care of that and get their water going to that pond where it's supposed to, and then see what we actually have on International Drive, because I don't think it's going to be that bad.
I'm talking about International at Broad.
Oh.
Because there's on the, let's see, it would be on the east side, there's a creek, I will call it. And that has, I was there the other day, that has grown, there's an island in the middle of that has grown a great big tree. Well. So, and when it rains, you can see the water, you can see on people's houses, outbuildings, garages, you can see where the water comes up.
That is on my list to investigate. I did not include that in International Drive drainage.
Okay.
What we've got there is the people that live east of International Drive. There's a bridge that gets to their residence. That bridge has effectively a dam underneath of it, that's a spillway. And I question whether that dam was legal and if it shouldn't be taken out. And I think that's what caused all the problems there, and I have not investigated that yet.
I've been down there, walked across the bridge and looked at the dam, and driven there in high tide, and okay.
In essence, they dammed up the stream to make that pond and stuff.
I think what happened is they put that bridge and it's a sluice or a dam underneath, and then when the housing and Kroger and everything went in on the north side of Broad, there's a lot of runoff, just stormwater runoff that wasn't there before. Then I think there's silt and things from construction projects and gravel and all that. It has built up it's built up between Broad Street and the dam. That's where those houses are. Okay.
My first inclination is that dam should be removed because I don't think it's supposed to be there, but I haven't found that out yet.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay, anything else? Yes, sir.
Just clarification on the pickup truck. Is it the pickup truck that has a hole in the bottom, or is it the single axle dump truck that has a hole?
It's a pickup truck that has
Pickup truck has a hole, because I asked for pictures of both of these, but that, anyhow, pickup truck has a hole in the floorboard, and the single axle has, you said several issues, mechanically, electronically, all those above things? Okay. And assume the single axle has its own plow at this point. Does it have a plow?
It does, but the mount's broke. And we've tried welding it, and it's broke again.
Okay. So is the plow useless, or is it the truck attachment that's useless?
I think that in theory, we could get a new plow mount and mount a plow to it.
Okay.
If that were what we wanted to do.
Kind of follow up. Is it your goal to hold on to this single axle for a backup type of thing?
Yes.
And so having it
To
be
use for-
usable plow would probably be a good idea.
It wouldn't be a backup for plowing, at least not intentionally. It would be, we can use the older trucks for dirt hauling, things that we don't want to use for the salt trucks that we're trying to keep, nicer.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Anything else for Alan? Okay, our next subject for the evening.
I know there were questions about the proposed finance position, and I'll turn it over to Jamie to walk you through what he provided to each of you, and you should have a copy of this on your desk.
Yeah, last Monday, I gave everybody a copy of my analysis. I reached out to colleagues in the IGFOA, trying to get information on how different size and scale, scope of cities, villages, townships, whatever, and how their finance departments were structured, just to see how we compared. Generally speaking, what I found was three is kind of a magic number, although bigger ones obviously go more than that, but even the smaller ones tended to have 3 full-time employees. And so when I did this analysis, there are 3 main reasons why I think we're looking at adding a staff at this point. We've been pretty efficient. As you know, I'm the first full-time finance director when I got here in 2012. Jason Carr has been a part-time finance director. And to be perfectly honest, I have no idea how he managed to do that as a part-time employee. I can only imagine he was working full-time hours and claiming part-time status because, it is a lot of work to keep everything straight and in line. We're to the point now where I think we need to start taking that next step and growing as an organization. The issues that I identified in my analysis were, the first is segregation of duties. With 2 of us, it's virtually impossible to have adequate segregation of duties. We do the best we can. We tag team. You do this, and then I'll take the next step, and you take the next step, and that's about all we can do. Auditors don't necessarily care for that. They recognize with a staff of 2, that's what you have, and that's how you work with it. But ideally, they prefer to have, clean hands all the way through. So you have one person who takes the cash, the other person who records the cash, and the next person who reconciles the bank, making sure that it all ties out. So there's that aspect of it. Additionally, with 2 of us, if one of us is on vacation and another person gets sick, we're down to nobody. Payroll Mondays become kind of crazy at times when Janice, she's allowed to take vacation. If she's not here, I'm doing payroll. So we're making it work, but it's not ideal with backup and those types of things, having some redundancy, having staff that can back up. And one of the things I did in my analysis, I broke down, I kind of did a brain dump, if you will, of what are all the tasks we do, what are all the responsibilities we have, and then I grouped them into types of functions and responsibilities like accounting, payroll, whatever they are, and I tried to identify, the left-hand side was where we are today with, finance manager and finance director, here's how we allocate the task, and then the second side of that then is how I decided, or initial thought of how we would allocate tasks between 3 of us, along with who would be primary backup or secondary backup, those types of things. So I tried to kind of get a general idea of how we would realign the tasks and responsibilities. And there's plenty of work to go around. So I think this gives a pretty good idea of the kinds of things we work on a regular basis. And finally, succession planning is also a concern, and it's one of the best practices by the GFOA, is making sure that you're prepared for succession planning. Janice has already told me at the latest, September 2019, she's gone. But I think in a heartbeat, if Larry said she could go tomorrow, she'd be out the door. So I would hate for that to happen, because then I'm stuck while we're trying to hire somebody to replace her. I'm down to just me, and so I wouldn't want to get in a situation where it's just down to me. So part of this process is the plan that I'm proposing is to add an accountant, clerk. We're still trying to resolve the titles. Ideally, I prefer it to be a non-bargaining unit member. So we need to make sure we can make that work. So we have that position, the finance manager and myself, and then we sort of allocate the responsibilities so that, when Janice does leave, with the two of us, we can keep maintaining stuff being processed accurately, appropriately, and properly, and timely, while we transition to find a finance manager to replace her. So that's kind of the over kind of 10,000 foot perspective of trying to figure out where the department needs to go. And so that's why I prepared this analysis. And I also looked at the MORPC salary study, which was a really good resource. Everybody who participates in it ranges from small to larger governments in the middle part of the state. And you can find out if their positions are comparable, if they're different, how they're different, if they're, the responsibilities are greater or less than the job description in the salary study. And by and large, I think if we were to target this at around I think it's $19 to $20 an hour wage, so about a $40,000 starting salary would not be an inappropriate place to start. It would put us kind of in the sweet spot at the lower end of what most of those starting pays are. So that's what I've built into the budget, and so that's what I have for you. Happy to answer any questions at this point.
So, and right now, finance is still taking care of HR duties?
Correct. We are doing.
Where are we at with finding an HR person?
We've advertised twice for the part-time position. Have not received any what I felt comfortable with as far as applicants, and we'll be coming back to council to talk about potentially increasing that hourly rate to attract better applicants for it.
Questions for Jamie?
If you can, no, never mind.
Sorry?
Never mind.
Mr. Lee?
Kind of stole my thunder there on the HR. I just was curious, how many hours a week do you think you spend on HR?
It for me, it truly varies. This time of year, I'm doing more with insurance. We also deal with workers' comp claims. So if you have somebody who's injured, you're spending more time researching the claim and dealing with the third-party administrator. One day I might spend, literally half a day doing HR-related tasks. Other days, I might not do anything. So it is truly a peak and valley kind of a thing. But then again, as much as I like to think I do a pretty decent job, I'm not doing it justice, because there's a lot of things that we probably should be doing, managing performance evaluations, those types of tasks that it just doesn't get done.
Comment?
Just one question, Jamie. With these that you have listed here, looking at the finance staff that is here, do you know how many of these have separate HR, or how is that being handled? So,
No, I didn't think about getting that aspect of it.
if we have, if you have Granville with 3 full-time, are they just strictly finance, or, Clayton or Ashtabula or wherever?
Most all of these, I would, in knowing the organizations, I know that they have at least one HR-related person.
In each department?
Yeah.
Okay.
But they typically aren't in finance.
That's what I was looking,
Yeah, they're
these are
typically-
strictly finance-related positions.
Strictly finance-related positions.
So if that was made priority and we got a HR person hired, do you still feel that you need, well, I like the succession planning part, but what, did you say September of 19 is when Janice?
Latest.
That's the latest.
At the latest? I get that. And I can't even imagine with your job, somebody new coming in, that's very valid. But I'm just wondering if we need this right now, if we should focus and get the HR director done first. And I'm just asking, I'm not, if that would help you in the short term, and then the long term, we look at this.
It wouldn't help me as much as the additional resource, again, because it doesn't address the segregation of duties and the ability to have backup and cross-training in the positions. So that, we're still kind of hit by that.
I think what strikes me is when Janice is gone, we have one person in finance.
That's valid. But what I'm saying is do we, I feel like we've kicked the can down the road on, and I get there hasn't been great candidates or whatever. I think when did we approve HR? A year ago? What,
Last year.
so that leads me to my next question is, what's it gonna take to get somebody in here or what is going to make this job attractive? Is it a couple of dollars more an hour? Is it the hours? I don't know. I feel like that should be a priority. I
HR
mean,
position.
we approved that a year ago.
Yeah. That's the
Quite frankly, I
positions
think
in
what would make
administrative
it most attractive is being full-time. That's one thing we've heard is people saying, hey, is this going to be full-time? We're looking, what we get are people in transition. and we would constantly have this
understand
turnover
that.
of people trying to retrain. And that's
So,
what we've seen is,
Is it
hey,
a full-time job, Jamie?
There's enough work that it could be, definitely. There's stuff that we aren't doing today, compliance types of things. With the health insurance, that would free me up at this time of year. There's enough.
and that's
That was
one
the
thing
goal.
I've seen time after time is people saying, hey, they're in transition. There's,
Right.
recently, got let go or quit a job. They're in a transition. Will this become full-time? And they're just looking for something to fill the gap. And we constantly have that new person coming in, and I don't think that serves an organization well to be constantly retraining somebody. It doesn't get us ahead.
All right.
Mrs. Carter?
The possibility of having a hybrid position, an additional finance person that also handles some of the HR duties in the short term. I mean, instead of us just jumping all the way in and saying, now we have an HR position that's not attractive and it's been advertised a number of times. We either don't pay enough or it's not full-time and we need another finance person. I mean, because there's a number of departments that, could use additional employees and police especially. So in the meantime,
We could definitely structure the position, whether it be that person takes on the HR responsibilities, or that frees up some off of Janice as an example, and she can take on some more of those types of responsibilities.
So one full-time person taking two duties.
Go ahead, Mike.
Could we reasonably have a part-time HR person and another part-time finance person instead of the full-time finance position?
Could we reasonably have it? My belief is with part-time, you're not getting real quality individuals. I could be wrong in saying that, from what I've seen, from commitment levels, quality individuals, you tend to get people who are in between jobs. You tend to get people who, are doing it something to do. I think the ideal scenario would be to create one full-time position that could help take on both of those duties. As Jamie said, some days it's heavy on HR, some days it's not. And there would certainly be the additional work there through finance then. There could be the segregation of duties, and, we're having one full-time position. I think we would attract much better quality candidates going that route.
my thought was then we could, at a later point down the road, if we find the need for, the workload and everything else, then we can continue to look at additional staffing. But, I mean, I know we've talked for at least a year or more about us getting a staffing assessment of all the departments and seeing what we have and, who needs, just so we can have a kind of a forecast of what we need for employees, period. So that's why, not that I don't believe the departments need the help, I struggle with just kind of intermittently adding one here and then adding one here when I haven't seen the full picture of what it is we may need, and where we could best put our resources, because we can't afford to give everybody something.
Mr. Hicken?
That's my question, Jamie. It doesn't go necessarily to the latest discussion, because this question came to me before that came up. It was will the clerk or whatever that position, it will be paid for by each individual, department,
Correct.
kind of the way you are.
Correct. Janice and myself are split amongst general, street, police, water and sewer. The administration doesn't go to police, but everything else, Jess goes to everybody but police.
And I guess this is not a gotcha, but I want to make sure everybody understands, because I don't have a problem either with the fiscal position or a hybrid position. Although I tend to think that if you aim for the hybrid position, and this is just my experience and my own belief, and I'd be happy to be wrong. Sometimes you'll get somebody who's really good at HR and they're no good at finance, or you'll get somebody who's really good at finance and doing the financial stuff, but they don't tend to excel at what makes an HR person good. If you can find that individual and that's how we post it, so be it. But back to the question part is, everybody is, when you presented the budget, all the department heads know that little extra bite's coming out. Did you guys have that inter-office discussion?
Not specifically, they're aware that we share, that finance is split amongst all, that they do see those budget numbers.
Okay, I just want to make sure that,
Yeah.
I would assume that is exactly what happened, but I'm just asking, so.
Mr. Walther?
Couple quick questions. Janie, thanks for putting this together. One of the things I noticed in here, you really don't have this person doing much of HR. You've got them doing one thing, which is a secondary position on HR, and I don't understand, what do you envision them actually doing for you under the proposed tasks? I mean, you have them under here as employment verification, which is defined as loan, whatever it's called. You guys called it something, loan.
We get verification of employment for loan
Verification.
applications, other things.
Right.
If somebody goes to another public employer, they need to verify their sick leave, their balance can change, those types of verifications. So that's part of what that is. The HR function was not, I mean, the expectation was that we were still planning to hire a part-time HR person, because that's what's in the budget right now.
So this person really wasn't in your mind, somebody was doing that?
As a big focus on HR, no.
Okay. And then. kind of
When I
fall-
built it, yeah.
Okay. You sound like it's a robot over there. So the other one I have a question for. You know, I've heard a few people talk, or at least managers within the departments talk about having to do their own requisitions and all that, processing and that stuff. Is this person somebody that will help with that?
Absolutely. I still think that the requisitions need to come from the departments. However, a lot of those have been reduced because we're doing more blanket requisitions for INDOF. We'll do one at the beginning of the year. So they have one blanket purchase order for the police for all year that they buy off of. So that doesn't require additional work. Typically, they tend to be the one-offs, like Bruce might want to order 5 new ballistic vests. So their clerk will submit the requisition. It goes through the process. I think it's important. The nice thing about the distributed workflow process is that these guys are intimately aware of what's being requested, what's being purchased. So they understand, because it's their budget at the end of the day, that you guys are going to look to them and go, why are you over budget, or why are you asking for more money because you spent your budget? But my expectation was that part of this resource could be used to assist them with like the purchasing functions. So if they need to buy an office chair, well, rather than have an officer or a sergeant running around trying to figure out what chair they want, maybe we can provide them that level of support, or give them options, or making sure that, like, when they do submit things, are there multiple? If it's a larger dollar item, did you look at multiple places? Did you go to look at Best Buy versus over here and over there? And
Have a specialist at it?
yeah, just making sure that we're being as efficient as possible. So sometimes when you don't have that resource, that falls on these guys. So again, you've got somebody who maybe you're paying a higher rate of pay, who's buying office supplies. Yeah, it's not the most efficient use of.
We don't
city
need a
resources.
sergeant going up to find an office chair.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think for those that don't have a clerk, or those departments that are 1 or 2 people, that's a lot of that's a lot of time consumed doing that. If there was somebody that was actually
Right.
prepared to do it.
For example, somebody like Alan, who really doesn't have an administrative purchase system.
Right.
For this kind of stuff, if he needs to buy something, then we would be available to provide. that.
That's kind of exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then one last question. So a $40,000 annual salary, if that's full-time, what do you anticipate that actually costing the city in general with all benefits? And I know they can choose some benefits, they choose some. Let's say that we got a person that needed all benefits. What worst case
Full
scenario?
family health insurance,
Worst case scenario.
PERS.
Not worst case.
You name it.
Most expensive case scenario.
So let's assume a $40,000 salary. Pension on that is 14%, so that's about $5,600. Health insurance, let's assume family coverage. I think that's about $12,000. So that's 57, 58. Incidentals, Medicare at 1.45%, a few other little things here or there. So probably call it around 60.
60, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Just a follow-up. I agree with Tim completely. I have the same concerns about the hybrid. Maybe it would be great. But before we go that route, could you find out if anybody else has that position, or if that's even been done before?
I'll tell you what I mean, easily can do is, all these individuals who reached out to me and shared this information, I'll follow up with all of them and say, hey, do you have an HR person, full-time, part-time? Is it a finance person, or, is it one of your people in finance that does accounting as well as HR? How does it work? Yeah, I can absolutely.
I just hate to lock into something like that and then, like Tim said, be good at one thing and not the other, and then we find out we need more of one or the other.
Well, I mean, the nice thing about where we are today is, I'm already doing a lot of the HR stuff, or most of the HR stuff. So this new person, as we can start at least somewhat creating a hybrid position day one. Because if there are things that I need to get done, some of those I can either offload off to Janice or onto this new position. So we can sort of probably do that, whether we do it officially or it's just how the workflow gets distributed. But
Fair enough.
on the job training.
Yeah, he would be on the job training.
Yes, sir, Mr. Hicken.
My other question was, there was a point when we were discussing this position where I don't know if it wasn't clear, and you may have spelled it out a little more clear. The goal is not necessarily to make the new position the stepping stone. Okay. I just want to make sure. I would assume that an assistant
I view it as a
finance.
different skill set.
I agree.
And the experience and education level, yeah. If I get lucky, that would be great. But I'm not targeting that, and I'm guessing I probably wouldn't find somebody who would be a stepping stone in at $40,000 a year, probably.
Anything else, Mrs. Carter? Anybody? Very good. Next subject.
Just open it up for any other questions the council may have. I know with Nate, his budget kind of is what it is as far as, what he can afford to do with rates and his capital. The planning and zoning usually is not very robust. Don't have a lot of big ticket items or projects. And then
Police Department?
if there are any questions for the police department.
Anybody have anything on anything? Mrs. Carter, Mr. Barstow, Mr. Lee?
I do not.
Yes, Nate?
Can I make a comment,
Sure
please? With the position you were just discussing, I just wanted to say that the utility department is in support of this, knowing it's one of those positions we end up helping to fund anyhow. There's a few things that give me ulcers or concerns. There's plenty outside of this building, but inside this building, I like this idea because if for extended illness or, I have a almost 20-year employee that could take 5 weeks of vacation if she wanted to. If that would happen, I'd be in a world of hurt because I'll be honest, I cannot do her job, and neither can her clerk. She does a lot of I don't know if high level is the right word, but transaction with the banks and, payment processes and balancing with finance and things like that. So I just wanted to say from the standpoint, when everybody's here and healthy, I still think it would be a good idea to have somebody that we could train into the fold if we had a situation. Even with for Tanya and taking money for mayor's court and stuff like that. So I just wanted to be able to at least say that from my standpoint. It would make me feel a lot better if maybe we had somebody else that could slide in and help out with that. And that's just my 2 cents. And that's
See, we've run into that. When Tanya takes vacation, we've trained Jess asked her to take those duties so that we can keep flowing. So there's.
I even have a sense of panic if I'm the only person around and somebody wants to pay with the new card reader. That's just me.
Yes, okay. Anything, Mr. Lee?
I'm good.
Mr. Hicken?
No, I'm good.
Nope.
Yeah, I do. I wanted to talk a little.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. You got me to me now. Headley's Mill Bridge replacement. Is that still on the 2018 budget?
Lee Mill.
Never on the 2018 budget.
Okay, well, I'm going off of the October 11th, and it says under the Capital Improvement Fund 301, it had a Headley's Mill Bridge replacement. I'm sorry, I missed the 2021. Okay, so just making sure that that's not on there.
It's pushed out.
All right, good.
It always
That's
has
all I
been.
had, Jim.
Mr. Powell,
I do not.
Mr. King.
One thing I would ask of council is potentially give some direction or consensus to the administration with the proposed changes that were made tonight. We have a third reading scheduled coming up on Monday. If everybody's in agreement of these changes, we'll make those. There'll be a third reading on Monday. The exhibit would be amended by substitution, and then it would be scheduled for a fourth reading on November 20th.
Mr. Walther?
Yeah, we had brought up a couple, so outside of all the different items that were in the budget, some other things that were brought up besides that was, we had a community event budget idea. We had well, depending on when the comprehensive plan gets resolved to deal with, as far as having a consultant for that, whether we have a consultant or not. And then, we talked about a communications budget, something that we were going to utilize to communicate to the community. Those were all ideas that were talked about throughout the year as needs. And then the last one I would throw in there is, I don't know what the resolution was to the police dog, but I'm fully in favor of getting another police dog if we aren't going to utilize the existing police dog. So again, just ideas for the budget for this year, or for this coming year, that I don't think we really talked about. I don't know if it's proper to bring up the police facility at this point. I know we got bids in, and I know you guys are still digesting some of that. But there's just some ideas other than what were on the paper to begin with that I wanted to throw out there.
With the police facility, the budget as proposed has built into it a debt issuance of $4.5 million. That is absorbed in here, it's handled in here. We received the bids. We're going to have a meeting on Wednesday with the architect and potentially the lowest bidder to take a look at it. We did have one bidder withdraw today their bid. What we're looking at are two separate things. There are several bids for the main building that's under that $4.5 million. You add in the cruiser shelter, some get right around the $4.5 million. That question about the police facility will be answered as far as the budget when legislation is presented to council, either on the 6th or 20th, seeking authorization to sign a contract for the police facility. If council votes no at that time, the budget will be adjusted accordingly to remove that debt issuance payment from the budget for future years. Also, what I want to mention, if the parks levy is successful, we will have to make amendments to the budget to represent the parks revenue that will be realized starting in 2018. So we certainly could have other steps bringing the budget back to council for some of those changes.
And that would most likely be done, the parks one, I would imagine, most likely be done as a supplemental.
Yeah.
In January, probably.
And I appreciate you bringing up I totally, on the special events, because we're going to be obviously going into a new year with fireworks and power shows and street fairs and all that kind of stuff. And I hate to run into that issue again where we can't use signs, we can't use city employees, we can't use stuff like that.
Well, then, Jamie and I are just talking as far as having as far as having a separate line item for community events and tracking, paying from that, it's pretty difficult to do because our employees have swipe pay cards. They swipe into work that day. If they go set up signs, it's really hard to say, well, how much goes here? How long were you there? What I would recommend doing is just increasing the salary costs of the police department, the water department, because I know they put on things on the hydrants for the street fair. In the street department, those salaries to absorb some of that, if that's the direction we want to go, instead of just paying it out of the already budgeted costs.
The difference, I guess the one way I would deviate from that, though, would be if we have what I would call a true green dollar expense, right? So we're actually cutting a check to O'Neill Tents for a tent for an event. We could obviously set up a line item for community events or paying for the fireworks. I mean, I'm not saying we were doing that, but those types of things where there's a discrete expense that we are paying out versus employee wages and employee equipment, we can do that. but we have to figure out how many hours at what wage rate, and then we have to do a reallocation between the funds. So, can it be done? Yeah. At the end of the day, is the goal to know how much we've spent on community events? If that's the goal, we could probably set those tools up to track it and not have to worry about budgetary compliance. The concern is, what happens if we run out of budget in November and now there's the cookie walk and we can't give you any guys to do any work because we don't have a supplemental to do, I don't think that's the goal. I think the goal is to know how much we're spending on community events, and is it the right level, or should we do more or less? So I think we could probably set up processes in place to just track. Okay, so here's a page for the street fair. Who all worked? How many hours did they work? What did they do? We can do some rough calculations and say, okay, the street department, basically with wages and taxes and pension, they contributed $10,000 worth of labor for the street fair, and we can give you that information. I think that's probably a reasonable approach to that.
Mr. Hicken?
On this subject, there's the tracking aspect to it, but there's also the logic of, and I think it was Mr. Zetz that possibly pointed this out, that there are some things that the city is behind, and whether you create a line item for it or whether legislation, in some way, having council identify those helps us should the American Nazi Party decide to demand our signs so that they can put them out on the street with swastikas and say, I don't know, whatever they want to say. At which point we can say, no, these events council either through historical perspective or through the good deeds that they do for the community, we've identified these as something special. Or for that matter, it doesn't even have to be the Nazi Party. What if just Tim Hicken wants to use the signs because he's having a garage sale? So I think
you have to get council's approval on that, Tim.
we would probably need council, and I would
that-
expect each of my fellow councilmen to approve that.
And that's not a budgetary thing.
I agree with that. I'm just saying that when
far as
council,
creating a
when council identified those, the place that seemed to exist where they could be identified was the budget, and that's why it came up there. So if we can get around that issue and still address the finance officers and the administrators' concerns, I'm all for it. But it wasn't just a tracking mechanism, although I think that was also important. It's just, as I recollect, that's what drove that.
That's exactly, I agree with you 100%, Tim. That's exactly what the issues were.
As I see it, really, there's two sides of what you just said. One is the policy, the policy decision of council and administration. What events are going to be deemed to be official city-sponsored events, or able to avail themselves of the resources, the sign, the guys putting out the barricades, the cleaning up afterwards, whatever, versus the funding side of it.
Mr. Barstow?
Well, I mean, to me, this is really it's kind of making a mountain out of a molehill in my view. Because let's say for example, let's take two public events. Pelotonia, okay, comes through the city. They don't ask our permission to violate Ohio traffic laws by riding their bicycles all over the road. Chief, do they? Do they come and get a permit?
No, sir.
Does Pelotonia offer to pay the overtime or for your officers, if there is any, or for your officers?
Yeah, they do actually.
They do that? Okay, I didn't know. I just, so, there's an example, but of that. But the street fair, I don't know, does the Firefighters Association pay because your officers are down there patrolling for?
Yes.
I didn't know. I mean, I'm just asking. So, because that's something that the police are going to do. It's necessary to direct traffic for Pelotonia. It's necessary to provide security, safety at the street fair. So we do have some mechanism, but I think this was I think we probably more, instead of setting aside money, small amounts of money to pay for sign usage and somebody from the service department to drag a trailer, I think we need to adopt a policy as to what we're going to support. And obviously, to me, the police department's function is much different than the street function. I mean, we could go to Pelotonia and say, you're not coming through Pataskala. If you come through Pataskala, you're going to get cited for violating traffic laws. I'm not saying we should do that. It's a worthy event. It's a it causes some disruption, but it's a very worthy event. It's for a great cause. But we need to, I think we should have, rather than having Mr. Nicholson develop some sort of tracking mechanism for these small amounts of money that are used in these events, I think we should have a policy that determines, and then that we will either by name or some sort of guidance, so that we don't. To me, it's silly to track very small amounts of money in relation to the overall budget for these events, and then the question is, how do you track this? So that's just my 2 cents. I mean, I just think it's.
Mr. Powell?
I agree with Mr. Barstow. The time and the effort put into figuring out how to track all this stuff, would it even be worth it? Because then we're gonna have to put in time trying to track, how much time they put in tracking the. It just seems like it doesn't seem worth it to me.
Well, and I remember one of your suggestions, Andy, was, does the city take some of these events back over?
We've got all, there's several different choices to be made, and we may decide that those, 4 or 5 or whatever they turn out to be. I mean, whatever. I guess the 2 issues are, I think, as Mr. Zetz had said, this should be council's approval to use a sign or to have an officer or to pay for something, having employees do stuff. And as Tim had said, the idea was the budget gave the administration that ability to have that approval, that pre-approval essentially. So however you want to, I mean, I guess if we don't want to track things, and I agree that is an additional task for Jamie to try to, or for whomever to do. But at the same time, I think it's important, if we're going to be involved in these great community events, we got to figure out some way to support them correctly with council's approval. Well,
Mr. King?
And I think that, there's, as I listen to this discussion, there's different levels here. When we talk about police help for events, Pelotonia Street Fair, that's always special duty. So they're being, that's not at the city's cost. We don't have patrolmen on duty going down and sitting at the street fair, sitting at Pelotonia. So that's being covered. When the the public service guys are doing stuff, 99.9% of the time, it's going to be during their normal business day. So I think the best way to handle this is through policy, instead of saying, hey, Jason, you tell Jamie how many hours the guy spent putting a sign up, and then Jamie and Janice have to go in and calculate and say, take it from this fund now, not this fund in the PRS. The best way to do it is through the policy and adopting. We have a dozen core events here in the city that have been those historical events that, quite frankly, and I get the argument that what if somebody X, Y, or Z comes in and wants to do it, but core events like that have a historical nature usually are supported somehow by city staff to assist with doing that. And I think the best way to do it is to establish what those are, say these are the ones that are going to be supported. Anything else, if we want to establish rates even for somebody else that comes in and says, we want to rent some barricades, we can establish those rates and they can pay to rent the barricades, pick them up and return them and do all that stuff. But the best way to do it is through a policy and not creating a budget line item to try to track those actual costs through, because it gets real tricky with wages, PERS, insurance, you name it, to come out of that. So I'll put it together for council to adopt a policy for those events, and we'll move forward with it.
Yeah, it's very frustrating when I have to, like this past weekend, we had a new event that the business owners down at Pataskala Square Shopping Center had their trunk or treat. And after discussing it with BJ, I went and got the cones that the Lions Club had paid. A long time ago, the Lions Club paid for a whole bunch of cones, half of a bunch of cones that we bought so we could use them for the fireworks and use them for events without using always city stuff. So it gets frustrating when I know that I have to do all the labor or somebody else has to do all the labor and go get the cones. And I mean, very successful event, but again, it'd be nice if somehow, some way, we come up with something that the city's kicking in and not kicking in, but helping have community events. It was huge. There was 300 or 400 kids there in 2 hours getting candies from all the businesses down at Pataskala Square. It was a huge success. So, need help. So you're gonna work up what now?
The policy for council to adopt support for those core events that historically have occurred in the city. It will be council's prerogative to add to those or remove moving forward. You know, if we have, I don't know, the May Day parade, I don't know what it would be, you know, walking down.
Comrade.
I don't even know what that would be, so.
Comrade
That's
King.
an old Kent State
Comrade
thing.
King with
We
his
had
May
May
Day
Day in
parade.
Kent State, so. But we would, you know, so it would be council's prerogative then to, you know, add to that, remove from it, modify. But those core events would include the Public Services Department or the Utilities Department, not the stuff that you're calling in extra guys to do. That should be covered by a separate cost. But it would be those, you know, on a Friday to set up a detour for the street fair or put the signs out for Pelotonia or do this. That would be covered by the city, paying to those by adoption of a policy from city council.
Very good. When can you have that to us?
Monday.
Very good. Anything else tonight on the budget, the 2018 budget? Yes, sir.
Looking for direction and consensus on the changes. We haven't heard anything to say, no, don't do that, add this back in, remove it. So other than the crosswalks, those will certainly be in there to do the construction of one, and the others, unless we hear otherwise, we'll incorporate and get an exhibit ready to adopt by substitution.
Okay. Parks and Recs, police, anything? Andy?
Well, I'm going to comment on BJ with the changes. You know, I'm concerned about the additional monies for Mink and Maine. I assume those aren't covered by any grants or any other funding mechanism, right? Those are going to come out of the capital
It'd be
fund.
come out of capital,
Okay.
or even Maine coming out of the TIF, but it would be done as a supplemental.
Okay, so maybe one of them gets paid for out of the TIF?
Right.
Maybe one. So as
They're
we.
projections at this point,
Excuse me.
so.
What's that?
They're projections at this point, they
Right.
could certainly come in low.
So in what Tim was talking about with the striping is it's essentially an addition of $40,000 to this budget to get to the 65, which I don't have any problem with. I just look at some other pieces that we're actually looking at, such as the skid steer and the Mink Street garage, additions, and I think, well, you can't just add, and I think that Jamie and BJ and Alan did a great job pulling stuff out. But to go back and then add those things back in and get that line to drop again would be, I think, not as good as what you guys did initially. So I would put out there that, as far as I'm concerned, the skid steer, broom, and the Mink Street garage additions could be taken back out of this budget, and then again the potential use of the funds for $40,000 for the Broad Street striping, or for the Broad Street improvement with pet heads, and then also the additions we've got at Maine and Mink. Those I think should be in the budget, should go into the budget.
But didn't we,
Say Maine and Mink, what are you saying?
The two projects.
Two
that are
projects that are
outstanding.
going to go over a budget.
correct me if I'm wrong, didn't we say that we would add the crosswalks in if we had a surplus?
No,
No.
no,
They're looking for.
we had two options. You could either say, hey, we're going to wait to see if we have a surplus, and then we'd come back to council for a supplemental appropriation to say, spend that surplus on this project. It wouldn't be included in the
Okay.
budget per se.
That'll be done in January of 2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What, yeah,
But they're moving forward with the 50,000 that's been in for engineering.
correct.
They're on track. Okay.
As it's presented in the budget, yes.
But the last consensus we got was to add whatever the cost of one,
To
the
construct.
65 or whatever, the extra construction cost in the 18 budget.
Okay,
To
thank
not,
you.
to not wait until we saw what the surplus was.
All right, thank you.
Right.
I would agree with that.
Anything else? Well, we thank our hostess.
Wait a minute.
Yes.
We haven't come to a consensus on the skid steer and the brake
Garage.
and the garage.
Okay.
So we haven't.
If that's I'm torn between saying, well, and that is part of the budget process. Well, you can make people safe, but you have to get rid of a skid steer. And I don't mean to put it quite that bluntly, but that's the give and the take of saying this is important to one council person, this is important to another. I guess my question is, it kind of goes back to the term deficit spending and whether or not, for me, the administration says, the deficit spending is what drives the line down, right? Meaning you're spending more than you're bringing in. I guess I'd like some input from Mr. Nicholson and Mr. King as to whether or not the budget can handle both. Just out of curiosity.
Does it have the capacity to handle it? Absolutely. The question is, what level of fund balance do you want to carry over? And is it trending horizontally, or is it sort of downward trending? Obviously, if we leave them in and we do the 65, instead of having a carryover balance of $1,240,000, we're going to have a carryover balance of about $1,180,000. And that's still probably going to be about 33% of expenditures. So it's in our target range of 25 to 35. So yeah, we can. But then again, any dollar you spend today, you don't have in the future. So I mean, obviously, the trend line goes down. So it really is your comfort level. I don't see anything currently in this line that gives me heartburn. I had a little more heartburn before we made these changes. This looks more like the police department's fund balance, although maybe a slight decline. It's more or less horizontal in the 5 years. We've known for the last couple of years that 18 was going to be a big drop in the street fund because of Mink. This was that great white whale that was at one point 3 or 4 years out, then 2 years out, and now it's here. And it not only is it a big project, but it's gotten bigger thanks to ODOT and saying, okay, now it's going to cost you more. So that's why the line does what it does in 17 and 18. That was part of the plan. It was completely part of the plan for the last several years. Currently today, the way this looks, I'm comfortable with this. There's nothing, again, that gives me heartburn here with the way this budget looks today. But
Now, it's time for me to ask for clarification. Do you not have heartburn adding in the one project?
At $65,000? No, because I think when you look at the grand scheme of this line, you're going from 1.24 to 1.18, and it's such a minor change that we would see. You wouldn't even see much change to this line. What's nice about the way this is now, we're hovering right around $1 million carryover for the next 5 years, and it starts to go up again then in 2022. So it would be such a, that $65,000 or whatever would be such a minor part of this that it's really not going to change that $1 million line all that much.
So Alan's fine with it.
Mr. Mayor?
Jamie's fine with it. BJ's fine with it. Yes.
I guess I want to comment is that the budget is not, we budget. It's a planning tool. It's not fixed. It's not an appropriation.
Right.
Big difference between budgeting and appropriation. So if the right now I'm a little uncomfortable with because there's two things I don't know. One, the results of the park levy, and number two, the final numbers on the police station. Where exactly is that's going to be? We have a range, but the budget is a living document. So if the park levy doesn't pass and the police building is affordable but at the upper end, then we'll have to make a decision on what things get cut. If that's crossings or other things, Mr. Haynes' skid steer, if that has to go away, then that's what we have to do. We budget it, but we don't. It's not, the money doesn't go out until we appropriate it. So that's just the comment I would have.
Yeah. And that's a great point, Todd. Any expenditure over $10,000 has to come back to council for approval, regardless if it's approved as part of the budget or not. So council gets another chance to say yes or no to those big ticket items.
And numbers can change,
Right.
things can change before they even get back to
And if we
it.
have a giant sinkhole that consumes a couple $100,000, then clearly all bets are off and the math has to change.
Yes. So it's a planning document. It's not a rigid thing. So we've seen things fluctuate up and down, go down, and we've had increased costs. So we just have to be. That's what we have to be prepared for. Is in our back of our mind, if we have to, and I hope we don't, but if we have to say no, we just can't do that this year, then we can't do that.
Well, we've been on steady courses before too, and then taken, like Oak Meadow.
Mm-hmm.
We stopped, went back, and yeah.
So, thank you. But again, there's things that are unknowns, and we'll know in a week the answer to two of those two questions. We'll know in a week or so, and then we'll be able to be more comfortable in our planning going forward.
Okay, anything else? Well, I'd like to thank our hostess, J. Claire Hayes, and I'll look for an emotion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Barstow, seconded by Mrs. Carter. Discussion and roll.
Yes.
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 You okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.